Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome everyone into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running, nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology turned podcast. Everyone, welcome into the program. I hope that you're doing well and you are ready for today's show. As you may have noticed, last Friday we did not have a program, and if you listen to the previous show, then you would know why. But we're back, we're moved, we're good to go, and everyone, I hope that you're having a fantastic week. So, of course, as always, every Friday, Ralph joins us. He is, of course, our science and technology trends correspondent, and he brings us a medley of stories, everything that is new, uplifting, and stuff that might have slipped by your radar. Definitely slipped by mine because, man, busy. But we're happy to have a nice, fun, relaxing weekend. And ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and get into it. So, I should say before, computeramerica.com. That's where you'll find everything, including the show notes. The show notes are going to be super important because not only has Ralph included the 4 stories that we will be talking about, but of course, he also included last week because not just on my show, but he, of course, does a segment over on the Mark Mason show. Very, very similar, except I believe Ralph gets just a few minutes, and it's a hyper condensed version of what we do here, but it's still very, very interesting. So if you would like to find out more, you can check out the end of these show notes, and you'll see everything that happened over at KEX Portland, Oregon. So we'll include that as well. So let's go ahead and bring Ralph on and talk a little bit, and then we'll get into our stories. So as I said before, Ralph Bond, longtime Computer America contributor, and of course our science and technology trends correspondent. Ralph, welcome back onto the program. How you doing?
And we'll kick things off, with 2 solar energy stories. Where that frog got into my throat? Wait a minute, I know what I need.
Perfect
a massive
timing.
dose of caffeine. Here's what we need: caffeine.
Absolutely. We, of course, need those. But yeah.
Sorry about that.
a lot of green energy in the show notes and a lot more. So just wanted to say good morning, and hopefully you've been well over the past week. And I have to say, just real quick before we get into the stories and everything, that, I don't normally have a lot of time to listen to podcasts. I just have time to make it and trust that everyone else is going to listen to what I'm doing, while I do not contribute at all to the podcast ecosystem. But I will say that on the drive, I had a bit of time. And Ralph, I don't know what podcasts, you're really a fan of other than ours, of course, but I got to say, to really pass the time, we listened to the 6-part series, Behind the Bastards. If you've ever heard of it.
No. Behind the Bastards. Okay.
Behind the Bastards. They go in depth, and they kind of set the scene, set the history, and they kind of go into different people, different topics. The one that we listened to was like on the Illuminati and the complete, actual factual history of the Illuminati, not the hocus pocus wizardry stuff. They have segments on every person you've heard of or haven't heard of. Very interesting. I just got to say that that helped.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, it's a great idea to pass the time that way because, gosh almighty, I get so tired of listening to, unfortunately, regular commercial radio, for example. Too many commercials. Come on. Really?
we were driving through Arkansas, and that might have been the problem. No offense to Arkansas, but actually all the offense to Arkansas. But I got to say that we were driving through there, and we turned on AM radio. Ralph, did they turn off AM radio? Because we browsed 2 or 3 times throughout our trip. 0 AM radio stations. Like the only AM radio station was like the emergency services, tune into the station if there's a problem. Other than that, no AM radio.
That's kind of surprising, especially in a rural area. You would think that would be the reverse, but well, that's interesting.
it was very different, but still, commercial radio is one thing, and then of course music, because 3 to 4 minute songs are over the course of 10 hours, say, it's can get a little repetitive. So with that being said, though, we're here, we're back, we're happy. Ralph, let's go ahead and talk about what we try to do on our segment here today.
You got it. For first-time viewers / listeners, welcome. What I'm an aggregator of science and tech news features I find by monitoring a host of online news outlets. So I don't write this content. I report it. I'm a pass-through, and I try to condense these stories into a really digestible form. And I look for stories that usually don't capture mainstream press attention, and sometimes they're weird and quirky, but they're always interesting, I hope. And I'm always on the lookout for news that gives a glimpse into where we're headed in robotics, medical technology, sustainable energy technology, transportation advances, space research, physics, you name it, all across the board. And what we do, as we mentioned a moment ago, is Ben and I try to condense all of this down to the essential points in a digestible form. And I stress to the audience, as Ben mentioned at the outset, come out to computeramerica.com, get today's show notes. You'll have the notes, you'll have links, pictures, and so forth, because every single story we're going to do has so much more behind it, but we don't have time to get into it. We just give you we're like stones skipping across the water, giving you the high points, but you can dig deeper with those show notes. So please come out and get the notes.
Right, exactly. And we'll have those up by the time that this airs. And ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and get started with story number 1.
Yes, this is, the idea of where do we place solar panels? Tops of buildings here and there, giant solar farms, all of that's great, but let's get creative. And I love this first story. It's a very creative idea. Why not put solar panels between railroad tracks? What? Huh. Okay. So you think of the thousands of miles of railroad tracks around the world. And that's a zone where you could put solar panels. So this comes from wonderfulengineering.com. That's a really fun website. Everybody check it out. So last week on KEX Radio, and you mentioned this in passing at the end of today's show notes, I have last week's show notes. We talked about floating solar panels on water reservoirs. And this is another unusual placement idea. A Swiss startup, a company called Sunways, that's Sun-Ways, will soon install solar panels between railroad tracks in the western part of Switzerland. They're doing a proof of concept initial installation. And so the idea is simple. Why not install rugged solar panels in the space between railroad tracks across all or part of Switzerland's 3,300-mile-long national rail network? And what if you devised a self-powered, multi-car, train-like vehicle that could lay down the solar panels and then pick them up and store them when maintenance is required for the tracks, and then reinstall them? Now, if you have the show notes, you can see the picture of it's sort of going off into the distance there. We're looking at it right now, like a train, like a mini little train, right? But those big rectangular boxes are where you would store and or reverse the process, deploy these solar panels between the railroad tracks. And so this is what Sunways is proposing. And Sunways predicts that if Switzerland's railroads had solar panels between their tracks, that would generate 1 terawatt hour of solar energy per year, equivalent to around 2% of Switzerland's total electric energy consumption. So I said to myself, this wasn't in the article. I said, well, wait a minute. Well, what if we did this? So I did a little research. In the United States, we have approximately 160,000 miles of rail lines here in the United States. That's a lot. So, of course, you couldn't do this in every single square foot of these lines, but nonetheless, just imagine putting solar panels there. So using the Swiss model calculations, where they figured they could do 2% if they had 3,300 miles, I did a little math and came up with the idea of you could theoretically generate 48 terawatt hours of power each year in the United States if our entire 160,000 approximate miles of rail lines had solar panels between them, right? Now, The U.S., let's get real. The U.S. uses about 4,000 terawatt hours each year. So 48 is a tiny fraction, but heck, every bit helps if you do this in combination with tops of buildings and other places like that, the reservoirs, as we talked about last week on KEX radio. Hey, it all helps. And I just thought it was such a clever idea, kind of wacky, kind of interesting. But people out there are thinking, where's territory that could be dual purpose? So rail line and solar panel, pretty cool. And those panels would have to be very ruggedized. And the photo shows the photo where it's a close-up showing them being deployed. You can see they're hinged or connected. Like when I was a kid, we had these toys that were like little rectangular blocks that had fabric in between, and you could fold them up and do them into different shapes. This is how old I am. Probably people are going, what is Ralph talking about? This is pre-Legos, people. Anyway, it reminds me of that, where you would lay them down almost like a tape or like a faceted multi-part thing, and then you could pull them up and store them as well. They're hinged and so on. So fun, interesting, clever concept, I think.
Yeah, and of course, to be able to pick them up and redeploy them, kind of as you see fit. Very, very, very creative, and makes a lot of sense. And it seems like these articles always, researchers try to find infrastructure that humans use. This isn't something that you have to, you don't have to make train tracks. They're already there. Their current state of repair or disrepair is, regardless. But Ralph, it seems like between water reservoirs, I think we talked about dams, and we were talking about, they had them in California, like the waterways that they were using.
Oh, sure.
To do that in California a couple months ago. We covered a story about that. It seems like researchers are trying to find infrastructure that we are already maintaining, and let's just put solar on top of it. And that's the trend that just makes so much sense.
Yeah, I agree. And I was thinking about Portland Airport, like many metro airports. They have these gigantic parking lots these days, right? I'm sure everybody can picture this in their mind. And I just had a thought. What if you could make a super ruggedized solar panel that could be put into the pavement, not where cars park, but in all the lanes? Because if you go out to the Portland Airport and you go out into their massive parking lot off-site, 99% of the time, nobody's driving down those access lanes because the cars are there and stationary. If you put ruggedized solar panels embedded into the pavement that could endure that were rugged enough to endure that, you could generate a ton of solar energy, right? I mean, so the idea is let's get creative about where we can put solar panels. And maybe my idea is smoking dope, but I still think something worth the idea. The point I'm trying to make is we're getting creative about where can we put solar panels, and that's what's so fun about this story and the ability to kind of speculate where could we go elsewhere.
So I'll add one more idea out there for people to kind of think about, and then we'll move on to the next story. But Ralph, being able to embed solar panels, I think, is the end goal. I'm not saying pavement is useless, but turn pavement into something that does more than one function.
Yep.
That's of course going to get there eventually, but I got to say that ideas like this, and this comes from Yale, this back in 2021, they want to make canopies for parking lots that provide shade and cool down the parking lot, but of course provide tons of solar energy.
Yeah, I love it. And that's a perfect segue to the next story.
Perfect. Let's go ahead and do it.
Okay, so keep that picture of that parking lot up there for a second, because it's perfect for what we're going to talk about here. Because that is, in essence, a solar farm, right? Basically, except it's leveraging a parking lot. I love it. Just perfect. So the next story here is headline: New autonomous pile driving robot will accelerate solar farm construction. I got this from Forbes magazine. And yes, you're showing the picture of it. It's very cool. So the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, which included an incredible amount of things, includes a goal to install 950 million solar panels in the United States by 2030. So that'd be great, above and beyond what we already have. Can you imagine 950 million? Wow. So large solar farms, just like that picture you were showing of the parking lot, require thousands of 12 to 16 foot long steel support piles upon which the solar panels are mounted. Now, traditional manual labor installation methods today can complete about 100 piles per day. Well, to dramatically speed up this process, a California-based outfit called Built Robotics this month introduced at a trade show, by the way, a huge autonomous artificial intelligence guided pile driving robot they call the RPD-35, which stands for Robotic Pile Driver 35. And we have the benefit, if you're watching us, folks, you have the benefit of seeing the picture in the show notes, that this thing is basically a modified construction excavator. So picture the traditional tank-like treads and the arm and the bucket. You usually have a traditional bucket for scooping up dirt and so forth and so on. That's what they've done. They took a big construction excavator and tricked it out, and they equipped it with a special... What they did is they equipped it with a special device at the end of its arm that's designed specifically to pick up steel H-beams or piles, which are stacked on wing-like platforms projecting from the front and rear of the robot, flanking what would be the human operator's cab. So again, they didn't build this from the ground up. They took an existing excavator and tricked it out, most importantly, adding the artificial intelligence autonomous capability. So designed to build large, this thing's meant for large utility scale solar farms. The approximately 3.5 ton robot can autonomously survey the site, determine the optimal distribution and placement of the piles, grab a pile or beam, if you will, from one of the two onboard storage wings, drive the piles into the ground to a depth of 8 feet with less than an inch tolerance, so precise, and then inspect them at a rate of 300 piles per day with a 2-person monitoring crew. And so the company's goal, no surprise, is to help build utility scale solar farms faster, safer, and less expensive. And here's a key: making solar viable even in the most remote locations where maybe you have a labor shortage or so forth and so on. And by the way, you were showing the video. Be sure to check out their YouTube video. It's in the show notes, the link. It's so much fun to watch this. And I love the part about this technology will help make it more practical and cost effective to do solar farms in areas where maybe finding labor would be a challenge. So there we go. More solar.
It's not just finding labor, but I have to believe this is back-breaking work. Even though you have excavators that would dig the holes, and even though you have, it's still people that have to physically, just really drive these things into the ground. And, of course, Ralph, how many times have we seen a water main, a water line, a power cable, internet, whatever cut? I'm not saying that stuff won't happen, but, you zone it, you check it, you make sure everything's good to go. And then this robot just does everything. And the videos are so crazy. And obviously they're doing it in this big open field, but man, this thing just goes so quick. And Ralph, I guess there had to be some kind of solution to, kind of reach that goal by 2030 of getting that many solar panels. This is just super cool. And I can bet that a lot of construction workers are like, man, that's going to be so much easier.
Oh, gosh, yeah. And this is a great example of what is not original comment by my part, but the classic case of what if engineering. Well, wait a minute. What if we took an existing excavator? Well, what if we tricked it out? What if we put in an artificial intelligence system? What if we gave it, ability to optically look at the terrain and make decisions, and on and on and on? I just love it. It's the part I love it, I'm trying to stress, is taking something that already exists, a classic construction excavator, and saying, what if? I just love it.
I was just thinking about, I just mentioned the whole power and water lines and stuff like that. Ralph, there's already systems in place, and obviously you did a nice long stint at AutoCAD, or I should say Autodesk, which makes AutoCAD. I'm sorry,
right?
but yeah, they already have technology that kind of virtually places electrical lines and walls and stuff like that.
Oh yes.
I'm wondering if you could program that into the computer and be like, yeah, we have water and sewage and internet and power lines running through this property, but what if we just kind of like, made sure that the robot never touched or placed anything in this amount of dirt? I'm not saying that humans are, always going to be prone to accident, but if you really say that robot never drive a pile into this dirt, I mean, ideally it shouldn't, and that could be even
it's interesting,
just more safe.
Oh yeah, everything you just said is completely possible. For example, Autodesk and others today have software that can to the molecule almost predict where things are and how to avoid things and so forth. But this machine and this company's vision for this is really more for these open land, not urban situations. But you make a good point.
I was kind of thinking that we could then, maybe put them in places that are, let's say parking lots, and you kind of develop the technology and you are able to kind of pierce the asphalt, without damaging, the infrastructure underneath,
right?
Things like that. It could be adapted, but still, I mean, even by itself, what it already does is very, very cool. So,
well, in fact, Ben, my friend Mark Mason, the host of the Mark Mason Show on KEX Radio in Portland, Oregon, that you referred to, when we did this story, he said, "Hey, this could also be great for when you're doing, let's say, piers on waterfronts or something, or where it's the same concept where you need to put down some kind of pile or beam into the soil or into the water, shallows of the water, making a pier, a fishing pier, whatever, all these kinds of things, or shoring up construction for foundations." And I said, gosh, I mean, this is not just exclusively limited to only doing solar farm piles. It could be for other purposes as well. So who knows? We'll see where this robot idea goes.
Yeah, it's hey, maybe they'll even get a robot one day to make railroad tracks, and then it will. No, I'm joking.
Hey.
But yeah, it's there's definitely a lot of uses for it, and I actually just got an email, from a PR company that's. Ralph, I gotta say, AI, and this story number 3 is. Going to be very relevant to this. But I gotta say, there's a lot of fear mongering going on with AI, and it very much reminds me of like the blockchain when that first kind of came around, Ralph. I remember there were weeks on Computer America where we had nothing but another blockchain company, where at some point I was just like, great idea. I hope that you and your team do the best. But at the same time, man, the 9th blockchain idea that promises to solve, a problem. And, the blockchain, I'm not saying it didn't do something special, but AI feels very similar to that. And, I just got like a press release, and to circle back around, that saying that 40% of people are afraid that AI are going to replace their jobs. And I'm sure that if I read into the press release, which is actually right here, this is from Atlas VPN, and I'm sure, and let's see, they did this at the University of Queensland. So it was like new students coming into the workforce, and they think that 40% of them think that AI will replace jobs in their area of work. So a little bit different wording, but still, Ralph, AI is here and it's going to make big moves. It's not going to be as radical as I think a lot of people think it is. It's still developing, but it's doing amazing things and doing them faster than we ever thought. So that's my interlude. Let's go ahead and do story number 3.
Yeah. The quick comment though, I'm being an old guy. Old. I remember the days when the IBM it was business computer, desktop business computer, IBM, and the others early on start bringing this into the workplace. A lot of people thought, oh, that's going to, eliminate my job. What am I going to do? Typists and so forth. It just was very scary for a lot of people. And it actually turned out to create more jobs. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying, I'm not Pollyannish about this. Maybe AI will or will not do this or that or up or down. But it might, in the end of the day, create more jobs. Maybe. Yeah. I don't know. We'll see. But anyway, great lead in here for story number 3. Headline here is more artificial intelligence coming into your life. First, we had OpenAI's ChatGPT, which you and I, Ben, talked about. But now there's Google's Bard, and I know you're aware of this, but some of our listeners may not be aware of this because the ChatGPT and OpenAI's thing and Microsoft and so forth, that made big news splash even on the mainstream news. But it seems to me like Google's Bard is a little bit of a quieter kind of thing, but very significant. I got
much
this from
more recent.
eWeek.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and much more recent. So this comes from eweek.com, and many other sources too covered this story in the technology field. So recently, we talked about Microsoft injecting artificial intelligence capabilities into its Bing and Edge browsers. And by the way, now when my Edge browser comes up, there's a little Bing icon on the upper right, and that's where I can go and access this technology. So Microsoft has gotten into bed and made giant investments into OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT. Well, the competition is now really heating up with Google recently announcing in late February its alternative called Bard, B-A-R-D. So I got an email from the Google Bard team with a link to sign up for early access, which I did, and I got that access earlier this week. And I've been having a lot of fun playing around with Bard. And for example, in the show notes, I included what I did with Bard, just fun, crazy thing. Little screen grab is in the show notes. And I asked it to write a silly kid's story. So what I said to Bard was, write a kid's story about Petunia, a little girl with pink hair who stages a fashion show with clothes made with crazy items. And, within, 30 seconds or something like that, here's what came back. And this was just one of several variations I could have looked at. And we're not going to take time to read this, of course, and people will come out and get the show notes and check this out, because to me, I was floored. I was blown away by how natural the language was.
Yeah.
How it was as if a human being had written this. It just blew my mind.
I'm reading it, and it's honestly written very human-like, which for Google, kind of thinking what Google can do, where they can kind of scrape all, the entirety of Google searches and things like that. It's I gotta say, Ralph, one thing AI kind of does, it iterates upon itself, and it can get very circular very quickly. It will say the same thing 5 different times,
right? Because
to the AI, that makes sense. This story that was kind of generated, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's very, very good.
Isn't that something? I mean, it just blows my mind. I will read one sentence just to give those who are not maybe having the opportunity to see us right now. One sentence from this story generated by Bard. Petunia was so happy with her fashion show. She had made a lot of new friends, and she learned that it's okay to be different. She also learned that you can make anything into a fashion statement if you use your imagination. Wow. Now, going to the thing about fear of losing jobs, a lot of people might think, I'm a writer. Let's take a profession that you and I are very familiar with, press relations and writing press releases. Believe me, I spent a lot of my career and life doing that for high-tech companies, Intel and others. And it's not impossible that you could feed Bard a certain things. I want a news release that talks about this, here are the features, and boom, it would generate something that you might think a human being wrote, and thus thousands upon thousands of press relations people who are writers are out of work. Now, that's the scary side of it. But on the other hand, maybe it creates new opportunities. I don't know.
I'm already 100% sure that, whenever I read like financial news, they have those articles that pop up at the end of every day or at the beginning of every day saying, here's how the markets are moving. Here's what the markets are doing. I'm 100% sure for like the past 4 to 5 years, it's already happened. They will automatically scrape and say, the Dow went down X amount of points or went up X amount of points. And they put that into a formula. Like, Ralph, that hasn't been written by a person in years, I'm pretty sure. That's already been automated. Right. And that's where I'm kind of hoping that like all these chatbots and whatnot, and all the writing that they do, it kind of like they're very good at kind of scraping information, putting it into a format that you can read, and sending it out there. But when it comes to research, creative thinking, kind of detective work and whatnot, connecting A to B, that's where writers are free from having to write, day 843, I have to say how many times how much the Dow went up or down. Instead, hey, they get to go out and interview people and write articles and, have that human touch to author.
Yeah. And so for me right now, and again, I may be too optimistic, but I'm hoping that AI becomes an augmentation to the human workforce, not a replacement, so that it will, over time, humans will find a different or modified function, but collaborate hand in hand with AI. Now that's the positive.
And then we'll get back to the article, but I could say so many things on this because it's scary, but it's fun at the same time. Where I have to say, Ralph, that I'm hoping AI does things, does basic things very well. So if you need a quick mock-up, if you need a picture and you can describe the picture and then AI will spit it out, smiling white girl holding a tube of toothpaste, and then you could slap your logo on it and there you go. Not saying that creative people are going to be out of work. It's just the basic stuff anyone will be able to do. And I'm kind of hoping that, like, Ralph, the floor is going to be raised. Everyone's going to be okay at making their own pictures, at making their own stories, at making their own press releases. But if you want something good, you're still going to go to people. And that's still where, humans are better than AI. And I want to make that perfectly clear. That's going to stay that way for a while. So
I think you're right. Yeah. So we'll pick up now and go on. So, this, but many of our listeners and viewers may not be totally tuned into what we're talking about here. So ChatGPT and now Google's Bard are what we call generative artificial intelligence tool. And that little silly story that we showed in the show notes is a perfect example of generative artificial intelligence tool. So generative AI is a type of AI system that, in response to user prompts and questions, so you can see in the show notes how I asked Bard to write this story, that's capable of generating text, images, or other media, and also analyze or summarize content from huge knowledge databases. That's where this pool of information that's out there in the World Wide Web is so important. And the term generative AI captured a lot of media attention when OpenAI launched ChatGPT in November of last year. And that got a lot of attention, but Bard's been kind of flying a little bit under the radar. Experts have been and continue debating the good and bad things, as you and I just did, about generative artificial intelligence, but all agree this emerging technology is going to change our digital lives again, like you and I were just discussing. But regardless of how this works out over time, Google's Bard AI platform is expected to rapidly gain users. That's because, Google has vast expertise in algorithms and artificial intelligence. So this is going to be fun to watch. Fun, scary, you choose. We'll find out. We'll see what happens.
They're from like a technologist point of view, there hopefully will be kind of a watershed moment that leads these companies to be open source with all this stuff. Because right now, Ralph, the goal is to make who can make the best AI, who can make the best, most understanding artificial intelligence that can do the most work. Ideally, that becomes open source and everyone can see how they're made. Everything just kind of, everyone works together. That's kind of the hopeful part of it, because Ralph, you can see where if someone suddenly, for some reason, quantum leaps ahead of everyone else and they have the best AI, they could replace a lot of work. They could replace a lot of people, and it could disrupt the system a bit too much. I'm hoping there's open source, open software, talk about it all the time, that, AI becomes more collaborative among everyone instead of just an arms race between companies. That's my hope, anyways. That's Well, it reminds me, and I'm an old guy here, when the World Wide Web and the early days of the internet and so forth, you've got mail, all that kind of stuff. People were really freaking out. They were excited and having fun, but they were afraid also. And so I can remember that. And this reminds me, it's another one of these, as Andy Grove used to say at Intel, a strategic inflection point. It's really a critical point that we're at. And it's going to be so much, fun, maybe not the right word, but very interesting to see how this plays out. No, it definitely will be. To me, it's kind of like if only Intel created, the microprocessor, and everyone else was still just working with, much older, computers the size of rooms, and Intel had, a modern laptop to work with. That wouldn't exactly be good for the market in any way. But now that we have everyone creating computers, multiple companies making processors, that whole thing, hey, there's something to it. So
yeah,
I don't know. AI is going to stick around. It does have a lot of hype. It does have a lot of the same Bitcoin feeling, but at the same time, it is going to have an impact on your work. So we'll see.
Absolutely.
And let's see, Ralph, you're the science technology trends correspondent. So yeah, you're going to be talking about AI for quite some time because it's definitely a trend.
Yeah.
Yep. Perfect. So there's story number 3. Story number 4, our last story for the day. And again, just want to remind everyone that in the show notes, we'll include last week because I was gone, but Ralph was still hard at work. We'll include the last 4 stories that he did with over on the Mark Mason show last week at the end of these stories. So, but the last story for today, story number 4.
Yeah. The headline here is scientists invent oxygen ion battery as a longer lasting and safer alternative to lithium-ion batteries. And I got this
replacing the lithium-ion battery. That has been a goal for 30, 40 years. So
I know.
Fingers crossed.
I know. Absolutely. And I'll jump kind of ahead here. This is going to have a specific application, not a universal application. Okay. So I'm jumping ahead, but I got this from techexplorer.com, a really fun website. So today, of course, lithium-ion battery technology is everywhere in our electric cars, smartphones, you name it. Right. But as you just said, perfect. Researchers keep hunting for alternatives for a variety of reasons to make them less expensive, safer, and so on and so forth. Scientists at Vienna University of Technology have now succeeded in developing an oxygen ion battery alternative that offers important advantages over lithium ion batteries. But it's not the solution to everything. So again, I'm jumping forward. While the new oxygen ion battery technology does not offer the high energy densities of lithium ion batteries, it does offer a major breakthrough advantage. And I said to myself, time out. I want to understand what they mean by energy densities. And real quick, energy density is a measure of how much energy a battery contains in proportion to its weight. And this measurement is typically presented in watt hours per kilogram. And a watt hour is a measure of electrical energy that is equivalent to the consumption of 1 watt for 1 hour. Okay. And power density is the measure of how quickly the energy can be delivered rather than how much stored energy is available. And energy density is often confused with power density. So it's important to understand the distinction. And I've got the link here for the article that explains that. So I just did a little aside here because I wanted to understand that. So once again, this new oxygen ion battery technology does not offer the high energy densities of lithium-ion batteries, but it does have an important advantage. So as we know, and here's where this advantage is going to come into play. As we all know, the lithium-ion battery in your phone or other products, maybe your EV car, over time, gradually loses storage capacity. It ultimately dies and has to be replaced. And as time goes on, we're going to see more and more cars, even like my RAV4 Prime, which is a plug-in hybrid. If someday I'm going to have to replace those batteries someday. Yeah. But the storage capacity of an oxygen ion battery, this new one from Vienna, can be regenerated to offer an extremely long service life. And so that I thought was really cool. Another way the new oxygen ion batteries differ from lithium ion technology is the use of ceramic materials within the battery, which play a role in the generation of electrical output. And believe me, I am really like a stone skipping over the water, just giving you the bare high level essentials. So you can get into the article and learn more about what the heck are they talking about with the ceramic materials, because it's fascinating. So I'm going to geek out for a moment and we'll explain a little bit of what the ceramics do. When an electric voltage is applied, the oxygen ions migrate from one ceramic material to another within the battery, after which they can be made to migrate back again, thus generating electric current. Excuse me. The significance of the use of ceramic materials goes beyond just a technical composition difference between these oxygen-ion and lithium-ion batteries. So unlike lithium-ion batteries, which can present a fire hazard, every once in a while in the news, right, you hear a story about, I've even remember a story recently where one of those lithium-ion scooters, like the Razor scooter, that
right.
you know, those kind of things, caught on fire and caused a terrible house fire and all this. So that's an issue with lithium-ion that some people are concerned about.
There's a reason why when you go flying and they ask you, you know, do you have any batteries in your checked baggage?
Right.
They don't let you because, hey, they tend to explode.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah. So again, lithium-ion batteries present a fire hazard. The use of ceramic materials in the oxygen-ion battery makes them, as the article said, virtually realistically non-flammable. Not absolutely, but you know, let's get real. The likelihood of fire is very, very small. So in addition, unlike lithium-ion batteries, producing an oxygen-ion battery does not require the use of rare earth materials, which are expensive or can only be extracted in an environmentally harmful way. So there's so much controversy about lithium mining, right, for example. And when it comes to how this new battery technology will be used, here's the truth in lending part of this story. The Vienna University of Technology team says oxygen-ion batteries would not be good candidates for small devices like your smartphone. And you can get into the article and find out all the technical details behind that paragraph. But again, this isn't going to come to your smartphone, all right? But instead, the team believes the oxygen-ion batteries would be an excellent solution for large-scale energy storage systems. For example, huge banks of batteries to store electrical energy from wind or solar farm sources. So remember, this doesn't have this has much longer life batteries than lithium ions. So for these huge installations, that's a gigantic plus. So and the fact that it can't match the energy densities of the lithium ion is less of an issue when you're talking about a massive, like, row upon row upon row of these storage batteries for this large storage purpose. Kind of overcomes that objection and makes these oxygen ion batteries very attractive. So cool stuff.
Yeah, no, for sure. My brother, when he was getting his PhD in chemistry, so he'd be much more knowledgeable about all this than I would, who actually skipped chemistry in high school. But I got to say that he was working on these things called flow batteries. I don't know if you've ever heard those, Ralph. They're essentially giant batteries that are that they bury in the ground. They're like cisterns, and they have all the chemicals in them, and they're like, you know, zinc, bromine, bromine, whatever, and other chemicals, and they kind of do the battery thing but underground. And you could think for like hospitals, like they have generators and giant battery tanks. They're like giant 500, 1,000 gallon batteries, so you could think of a AA and blow that up by 1,000 times. So you could think that maybe something like that, where you need the energy density and system critical buildings, and that could save lives, having even more electricity that you could store would be just amazing to have. Let's say a hospital be able to run on its own power for a week at a time instead of just hours.
Very important.
A lot of good uses for the ceramic stuff. And even though it, like you said, it probably won't come to your cell phone, but it could still be incredibly influential in what it ends up doing. So very, very cool.
Hey, Ben, if we have just a second, I'll just read the headlines of the 4 stories we did last week, just to tease the audience. So story 1 from last week was researchers have created world's fastest walking humanoid robot. Great story. You got to check it out, folks. Second story we did, and this one really is funny, but also significant. New drug rapidly counteracts intoxication or alcohol poisoning, quickly sobers up drunk mice. You can't resist that. You can't resist that story. Check it out. Story 3 from last week, artificial intelligence and machine learning offer recyclers a new way to separate compostable and conventional plastics. This is really a great story also. And the last one, this we referred to in the beginning of the show today, floating solar panels on water reservoirs, an idea that's gaining traction. So folks, do check those stories out if you come out and get the show notes.
Absolutely. And of course, I could really imagine that last story as well, just being so helpful because those things are giant reflective pools, and being able to reduce the reflection rate helps in so many different ways. So, ladies and gentlemen, there's those stories. And of course, the 4 that we did, Ralph gave you the highlights, but there is even more to do with those. So I want to thank Ralph and everyone. I want to thank you for joining us here on Computer America. We hope that, some of these stories caught your attention. And if you'd like to find out more, computeramerica.com, or of course Ralph's site as well, where we will have a link at the top of the show notes to his site. It's all about Ralph, and of course we also have a YouTube playlist that is entirely dedicated to Ralph as well. So ladies and gentlemen, until next time, thank you so much. We'll catch you here next time. Bye-bye.